Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel, and today we are back making another video for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And honestly, I wasn't expecting this to be the movie to bring me back to making videos, but hey, here we are. I really did enjoy my time watching Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. I got a chance to watch this movie, on Monday. So before the review embargo dropped and, now has dropped earlier today, I've seen the mostly mixed to negative, some positive reviews for this movie. And, when you go into this movie, especially the way that I did without knowing the reviews, without knowing the expectations set by the people who have actually seen the movie, I was going in with fairly low expectations. And I will say that low expectations are really the cure for movies like this. This movie, of course, brings back Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Ernie Hudson as the original three Ghostbusters, but the movie also is very much a sequel to Ghostbusters Afterlife, with McKenna being the lead of this film alongside Paul Rudd, Carrie, Coon, and Finn Wolfhard. And I think that this movie does a good job at blending together these two worlds to make a sequel to Ghostbusters Afterlife in a way where you're bringing back those characters, but you're also feeling more like a Ghostbusters movie because this movie brings you back to the Big Apple. You're back in New York City. You're busting ghosts right from the beginning of the movie, and I think it is a good blend of those two worlds. So we're going to be getting to spoilers for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire because I have a lot to talk about in terms of the villainous aspects of this movie, in terms of some of the comedy in this movie, and some of the character arcs that I thought was surprising. And I thought that this movie took, its own path. It forged its own path instead of solely focusing on the nostalgia that the previous film did. So what is this film about? Well, it's another Ghostbusters movie. You have our group of Ghostbusters for the first time actually busting ghosts right from the beginning of the movie. There's no point where they're kind of reconvening, they're kind of coming back together like they did in Ghostbusters 2 or Ghostbusters Afterlife was in a small town that was kind of out in the middle of nowhere that had a more Stranger Things mystery type of tone to this movie. This movie is straight up a Ghostbusters movie. You have Paul Rudd, you have Carrie Coon, you have McKenna, and you have Finn Wolfhard going out in the car from basically the opening scene of this movie, catching this like dragon looking ghost that's flying through New York City in a very fun and entertaining sequence that of course ends off on a great joke from Paul Rudd. And I think the family dynamic in this movie carries through very naturally from the previous film. I love these four together on screen, and honestly, McKenna is one of my favorite characters in this series because she is so engaging as a character. Yeah, she's quirky and weird and has some bad jokes, which they do bring back in this movie. She has a couple of them, not as much as she had in that first film, but it felt like a natural character progression for this character. But the movie is solely focused on this character essentially being seen as a child in this ghost-busting world, essentially working child labor. And, there's some laws that they want to try to prevent her from, being a part of all this because it is dangerous and they're causing destruction around the city. And you have that one guy who's been trying to shut down the Ghostbusters for years now. He's back again trying to shut them down once again, trying to use the excuse of this little kid working as a Ghostbuster as something that shouldn't be legal, that shouldn't be allowed because you're endangering this child, which is very true, by the way. But at the same time, this is something that McKenna has a passion for. She's very, very smart. She's an integral member of the Ghostbusters, and so to be put on the sidelines is heartbreaking for this character. After being teased as a successful businessman at the end of Ghostbusters Afterlife, you have Ernie Hudson playing Winston once again, but as essentially the financial head of the Ghostbusters. He's the one who bought back the firehouse. He's the one who's kind of running things behind the scenes. He has a lot of power in terms of the Ghostbusters, and he also has this new facility off on the side to store more ghosts because the actual, ghost trap that they have in the firehouse is getting a little bit too full. It's getting to a point where they're worried about it bursting and all these ghosts getting out, and so he has this new facility with these new characters that we're going to be bringing into this series as well. And you have Dan Aykroyd also, running his shop that he has been running ever since the end of the second movie, I believe, or I think maybe it was just introduced in Afterlife, but he essentially buys these old relics off of people, and if it has a ghost attached to it, then he goes ahead and brings it to Ernie Hudson, and they can extract the ghost from these objects. And I actually really loved this aspect of the movie because it takes this idea that, objects can be haunted that has been, in folk tales for essentially all of time, where you have like the Annabelles of the world, and you have stuff like that, this doll that can be possessed by some sort of ghost that is, essentially trapped in this object like a ghost trap, a more natural, surviving ghost trap that can trap these ghosts, these spirits inside of them because of some traumatic events that they have gone through. And it explores that idea of these objects being haunted, including this orb that Kumail Nanjiani's character drops off at Dan Aykroyd's place. And like I said, I really like the elements of this Ghostbusters movie in specific that's, try to forge its own path to do something new in the franchise that they haven't done before. And I think this is a great key example of that sort of thing, because you're introducing a new ghost, a new spirit that is going to be the villain of this movie, Garaka being held within this spiritual object, and you're introducing this idea that objects can also be haunted in the same way that people can be haunted. That is, been, a device in horror movies for years and years and years, and for Ghostbusters to be tackling this idea in a new fun way, I really did enjoy this. And also Garaka as the villain of this movie was genuinely terrifying. I love the design of this ghost, and although this ghost isn't unleashed until the end of the movie, you really get to feel the presence of this thing in this orb, this insurmountable evil trying to escape this object. That felt really cool, and the manipulation that it tries to do to get these other spirits around them to try to set it free was also very interesting. Probably my favorite storyline in the movie was, of course, McKenna Grace's character. Like I said, after she was kind of banished from being a Ghostbuster, she was set off on the side. She goes to the park to play chess, and the pieces start moving again, and I think everybody in the audience will think that it is going to be Egon, coming back to play chess once again with his granddaughter, and that is not the case. It's actually this other spirit, this new character that is introduced into this movie, played by the actress who played Snake by Andy in Doctor Sleep, which is great to see her in another role. But she's a spirit who burned down along with her family in this house. It's kind of alluded to that it is her fault that the whole thing happened, and her object essentially is this matchbook with one remaining match that she can't quite strike and burn away. She can't quite move on to the afterlife because she has some unfinished business here, and she befriends McKenna Grace's character, and I think there's a hint of romance between these two characters that I thought was absolutely beautiful. And the way that they kind of hinted at this idea that it's this kind of Romeo and Juliet situation where it's this love that can never truly become a thing, because once this ghost character finds that purpose once again, she'll move on to the afterlife. And I think that is such a tragic idea. And if there's a movie out there that kind of tackles this idea of somebody falling in love with a spirit, but as soon as that love becomes solidified, then that ghost moves on, and therefore that love ends at that moment, that is such a heartbreaking story. And I love that this movie kind of hinted at that sort of idea. But like I said, Garaka is trying very hard to manipulate these spirits around him to try to let them set him free. And so you have this girl that is going to be manipulating McKenna Grace's character throughout the entire movie to try to, I think this storyline, there's a lot of plot holes in this movie. I will say that it is a bit messy with all the different branching storylines that come out of this idea that Garaka needs to escape. How is it going to escape? Of course, you have the storyline with this girl manipulating, Phoebe's character to try to, set her free. And it is very specific with, Phoebe needing to get into this device to separate her spirit from her body. And then the spirit of Garaka can possess her and then chant the words that will set Garaka free from this orb. I think that storyline is a little bit far-fetched, and that is a lot of specific dominoes that need to fall in a specific way to get that specific thing to happen. But I think what makes it work is that isn't the only plan Garaka had to escape, because you also have the little possessor ghost that kind of bounces between different objects that I really like the idea and the visuals of how this thing moved around. It also resulted in a lot of fun chase sequences where you have the characters trying to stop this thing in a trash bag as it kind of waddles through the library from the first movie. You also get that nostalgia of the scene that goes from the first movie coming back once again. And so you have all these little fun moments in this fun chase with Dan Aykroyd and some of the other kids in this movie, culminating into a point where this little possessor thing, possesses one of the giant lion statues outside. That was another really fun sequence within this movie. And it gets this little device that can speak the words that it needs to set Garaka free, but that little, device is broken at the end of this chase sequence, along with this little possessor thing escaping through its own little way of bouncing around different objects. And so I thought that was a fun sequence that I think it was great to have this little spirit kind of bouncing between all these objects. That just was a lot of fun to have. But it was another plan that Garaka had that actually failed. And so the McKenna Grace storyline with her being manipulated by the other ghosts was just yet another plan that Garaka was trying to enact to set him free. And yeah, if that sounds a little bit, muddled, a little bit convoluted, maybe it is a little bit. I think the more I think about this movie, the more messy it does seem. And I get the negative reception of this movie coming out of reviews because there are a lot of characters in this movie. I think that the movie does a good job with McKenna Grace's storyline. I think Dan Aykroyd actually gets a lot to do in this movie. He is a very fun presence to have as a returning Ghostbuster, along with Ernie Hudson also having a fairly prominent role in this movie. But then you have Finn Wolfhard, who doesn't quite have as much to do in this movie. He has this little subplot where he's chasing around Slimer in the attic of the firehouse, which was a very fun thing. There was a lot of funny jokes that got out of that, including the little possessor guy jumping into a pizza, crawling off the table and being eaten by Slimer, which was a great way to get rid of this threat. I thought that was a very funny moment in this movie, although I think that little possessor thing can still get away after that point of this movie, but who knows, Slimer kind of saved the day in that moment, which was a funny enough joke. But besides that, Finn Wolfhard didn't really have too much to do in this movie, along with Lucky and Podcast, who do come back in this movie. I didn't know that they were in this movie because I hadn't seen too many trailers, but these are two characters that they easily could have left back in Oklahoma, back after the last Ghostbusters Afterlife movie, and just kind of ignored those characters. But it's nice to see them pop up in here, even if it makes absolutely no sense for them to be in New York City, especially Podcast, because he literally says that he lied to his parents and they think he's at like a space camp, but he's in New York City, working with the Ghostbusters. And you also had the Lucky character who is like interning at the Ernie Hudson kind of science technology thing that he's setting up to try to trap more ghosts in this other facility. And so that's her reason of being back in New York City, which sure, why not? That's a reason, I guess. But they didn't really have too much reason to be in this movie, but I'm glad they brought them back because I think it would have been easier to just ignore them entirely. And they were a fun presence to have in this movie, and I'm glad they weren't ignored. And so yeah, there is a lot of people in this movie, even to a point where Bill Murray has his moments in this movie, but he's not nearly in this movie as much as a lot of people are probably expecting him to be, since the marketing is very much heavily implying that these original 3 Ghostbusters are going to be a big part of this movie. Don't really rely on that, because this is very much a sequel to Afterlife and those characters in Afterlife, more so than it is coming back together of these original Ghostbusters members that is still in this movie, but it's not as prominent. It's kind of like a Spider-Man No Way Home type of thing, where they are in the movie probably just as much as the Spider-Man were in Spider-Man No Way Home. Although Bill Murray did have a great sequence, probably my favorite scene with Bill Murray in this movie, with him interrogating Kumail Nanjiani's character, who is the Fire Master, which I'll get into him in a second here, but, him trying to interrogate him to try to get his, psychological, manipulation of this character, try to get him to spark up his Fire Master powers, and he's kind of throwing a pen at him and he's getting angry and the fire is sparking up. It was a fun sequence as well within this movie that I did enjoy the comedy of these characters coming back once again. I thought it was a fitting way to bring this character back into the fold of this entire situation. And the Kumail Nanjiani character, I think, is another character that a lot of people are probably gonna not like in this movie. Kumail Nanjiani is a very specific type of comedy that whenever he's in a movie, he essentially plays himself, and he's no different in this film. He is Kumail Nanjiani in a Ghostbusters movie, which means that if his comedy works for you, you're gonna really find a lot of his stuff funny, because I found a lot of his stuff funny. I do like him as an actor quite a bit, and he had a lot of great moments, a lot of great lines in this movie that was kind of thrown out of nowhere, a lot of awkward moments where he's trying to use his ability where it's not working out, where he's trying to light the little candle with the little lighter and he uses all the lighter fluid, and so when it gets to the end of the movie, he can't light the fire that he needs to stop Baraka. There's a lot of weird, just goofy moments in this movie that is very much akin to the original Ghostbusters movies. But I think some people might point out how silly it is by the end of the film with him literally shooting like fireballs at the villain, because that is legitimately what happens. He gets dressed up in this really over the top outfit that was something else, and then he's literally shooting fire out of his hands to attack Baraka. It might be a little bit out there, but this movie doesn't take itself too seriously, so you know what, I had fun with that sort of stuff. And I think in general, the third act of this movie where everything freezes over, I was honestly expecting that stuff to happen a lot earlier on in the film, especially with the original teaser trailer of this movie showcasing, the storm coming up to New York City and all those ice spikes coming out of the ground and all these people running away and all the chaos happening in New York City. That stuff doesn't happen until probably the last 30-40 minutes of the movie. And so if you're expecting that sort of stuff, no, expect a fairly standard Ghostbusters movie up until that point, and then you get the crazy stuff with the Ice Age happening and Baraka terrorizing all these people in the city. That doesn't happen until the ending of the film. But then you have all these so many characters in this movie all coming together, dress up in their Ghostbusters outfits, including Janine, who is also great to see her in uniform, as Bill Murray states in the trailer as well. But honestly, I thought it was a fun culmination of all these different characters coming together to stop this villain and this creepy spirit that's charging into the firehouse at the end of the movie. I thought it was fun. And so overall, I do think that this movie was maybe not the most cohesive movie in the world. Yeah, sure, it is messy at times, but I thought the comedy worked for me. I love the characters from Ghostbusters Afterlife, so I did like that this movie was very much a sequel to that versus, just throwing the original 3 back at us. throughout the entire movie. But then it was also great to see the original 3 Ghostbusters kind of teaming up with the new cast of characters by the end of this one in a very much a Ghostbusters style type of ending where things are going crazy around the city, and it feels a little bit more like Ghostbusters than Afterlife did because you're back in New York City, and it's less of that like Stranger Things tone that's, you know, Ghostbusters Afterlife had. It had more of a Ghostbusters tone that the original 2 movies had. So honestly, I just had a lot of fun with this movie. And again, some of those storylines that were surprising with the whole thing with the objects being possessed, Garaka being a pretty creepy villain, and McKenna Grace's more tragic storyline with this other spirit that she kind of falls in love with throughout this movie, I also thought was very heartbreaking, albeit a bit predictable considering that she had one match and the end of the movie required fire to be lit in order for Kumail Nanjiani to, you know, harness the fireball to shoot at the villain. And so yeah, I do understand the more negative response coming out of the critics from this movie, but if you did enjoy Ghostbusters Afterlife and you're in for a fun family movie that is just really, really entertaining, I think you'll be just as surprised with this movie as you were with Ghostbusters Afterlife, which again, a lot of people went in with lower expectations. So like I said at the very beginning of the review, lower expectations are the cure for movies like this, because you go into it not thinking it's going to be amazing and you have a really fun time watching it because it's purely entertaining and it's just a fun time at the theater. So if you were hesitant to go into this movie and for some reason you watched my spoiler review, go watch it. Or if you did watch this movie and you did enjoy it as much as I did, let me know in the comments down below what your favorite moments were. Did you like the storyline with McKenna Grace and this other ghost spirit? Did you like the original 3 and their role in this movie, along with the new cast and their roles in this movie? And did you think that moment with the Slimer eating the pizza was probably the funniest moment in the movie? Because I was dying at that. That was so funny. But either way, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. But yeah, I am back here on the channel, and hopefully I'll be more consistent with videos going here on out, going into the summer movie season. I hope maybe I'll go back and talk about like Love Lies Bleeding or some of the other movies that I missed over this past month that I also did really enjoy watching in the theater. And just look out for more videos here on the channel. Like I said, subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy this video. Leave a like, comment down below your thoughts on Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, and I hope to see you all in my next one.